So my last video, I covered the top 5 MMA fighters who I believe we should copy. What they all had in common was that they had a general, well-rounded approach to fighting. They had styles that were more or less mimicable, which leads us to this video. We're doing the top 5 MMA fighters who I don't think you should be copying. A couple of these fighters on this list might be surprising as they are legendary. But what makes fighters legendary doesn't necessarily mean we should be copying or mimicking what they do that made them so special. But stick to the end and I will tell you what you can borrow from each one of these fighters that would be beneficial to your training or fight game. And this is another edition of my Copycat series where we follow along what we shouldn't copy. So if you like this type of content, please hit that subscribe and hit that notification bell. So let's start. At number 5, I have Sean Strickland. Now, Sean Strickland has a style that is a little awkward even for most fighters. People even in sparring have trouble dealing with his style. He has a constant pressure and he has a really sneaky boxing style. He likes to use that Philly shell a lot, which works really well, but it works well for him. It suits him and his style of fighting and his approach. This is not necessarily something that we should be borrowing. He's pretty vocal about not liking to grapple or wrestle. He loves to strike. He likes to stand and bang with his opponents. Again, that's not a style if you want to be a true mixed martial artist to be copying or mimicking. Although, if you do have that style, if you are a great striker, it might work well for you, but it is not something that is easy to mimic. And again, it works really well for Sean Strickland. He has very high output, really good volume. He has a really strong chin. So it works well for him to be able to trade with opponents in that style. But not everyone is like that. Some of you might be evasive or defensive and like to counterpunch. He's a good counterpuncher, but he's also willing to stand and strike with his opponents, adopting that style that makes it work for him. Now, why I only have him at number 5 is that he has really good basic boxing fundamentals, at least when it comes to boxing for MMA. He has good use of his jab and he has good use of his long range push kicks. So there are some fundamental values in his game. But overall, not a style you'd want to copy because it suits his style of volume output and his ability to endure and take shots. At number 4, and it may be surprising that I didn't put him a bit higher on this list because of how special he is, but I have Anderson Silva. Now, Anderson Silva will go down as one of the greatest of all time. He is one of the greatest strikers in MMA of all time. And in his prime, he seemed unstoppable. He looked invincible in the cage. He appeared to be untouchable until he wasn't, which is why his style is not something we'd like to mimic. Now let's rewind a bit, go back to his skills. He was amazing in the cage. He could read his opponent so well. He was able to dodge, seamlessly evading every strike that comes at him, sometimes with his hands down and avoiding them and then counterpunching them. He had great power, but mimicking him is not a great idea. It would be the equivalent of, in boxing, trying to mimic Muhammad Ali. Their styles were specifically great because they made it work for them. That evasiveness, that slip, the confidence to be able to dodge and not worry about their opponents hitting them is something that's built in special with these type of fighters. But it came at a cost. Eventually, Anderson got caught. When he fought Chris Weidman, he was ducking and slipping and all that, but eventually a shot landed. And it dropped him, and he wasn't the same ever since. Doesn't take away his prime version of himself, but it's a lesson to be learned. You can't be keeping that style for longevity. At number 3, I've got Tony Ferguson. He was a great, well-rounded fighter, but his style was built around chaos. He had really good, clean striking, but he mixed in with some wild punches, which is not something you'd want to copy. But that's what made him so attractive as a fighter, is that he always put on a show. Even his grappling game was wild and chaotic. You didn't know what he was going to do. He had a very sneaky style of ground game and really great at fighting off his back. But that's not something you necessarily want to copy or mimic as well. He had a very strong mindset, but sometimes a little too strong. That mindset may have got him in trouble with his fighting. And within that chaos, he was able to strive in that chaos, willing to trade or bang with his opponents. Although admirable, that is not recommended for everyday fighters. It will cost you in the long run. Look what happened to Tony Ferguson. He took way too much damage in the course of his career, especially in his last moments, losing several fights straight. He was no longer able to take a hit. If you want longevity, you do not want to be copying Tony Ferguson's style. At number 2, I've got Conor McGregor. In his prime, he was a phenomenal striker. He was a great MMA fighter overall, even going down as arguably one of the greatest. He had great takedown defense, which made it work for him. But outside of that, he was a bit of a one-trick pony. He relied heavily on that counter left punch. His stance was also very unorthodox, very wide stance. Usually not recommended for most MMA fighters because that leaves your lead leg open for kicks. And he paid the price against Dustin Poirier. He exposed that stance easily in their second and third fight. Unfortunately, that third fight resulted in that leg break too, which was pretty nasty. He was an exciting fighter to watch. He had one-punch knockout capabilities. He had great counter-punching. But he was also very exposed. He didn't have the best head movement or defensive movement when it came to striking defense, and it caught him a few times. Even against Khabib. Khabib is not primarily a striker. He's more of a grappler, but he landed an overhand cross that dropped Conor. He also got caught by Nate Diaz, which stunned him, stumbled him, and allowed Nate Diaz to land that rear naked choke in the end, which cost him that fight as well. Even though he had great skills that we could admire, he had some really bad habits that you don't want to be copying. He had both bad habits in the cage and outside the cage that we definitely don't want to be copying. At number 1, I've got Michael Venom Page, MVP, a phenomenal striker, similar to Anderson Silva, very evasive, can read his opponents, but you multiply his confidence and cockiness by 50, maybe even by 100. But like everyone else on this list, that style suits him. He's developed that style over the years, which is hard for you to copy. You'd be playing catch up if you wanted to copy a style like MVP. He comes from a point fighting background, which allowed him to be able to go in and out, be quick with his movements, hard to read. That took years, decades of training and practice. He developed that style for him. He uses his antics as part of his strategy, the taunting, the movement. That's all part of his game, not just his personality. So it's not ideal to be copying that. Again, from my previous list of the top 5 fighters we should be copying, we want to be mimicking or borrowing the fundamentals. There's not much fundamentals in MVP's game. And again, even if you wanted to copy him, you probably couldn't. Other fighters who had to face him have difficulty finding a sparring partner similar to his style. So if even the pros can't even find somebody to mimic him, how would you? And that style, again, comes at a cost. Eventually, you would get caught. He has himself. He's been knocked out before, even though he's able to slip and dodge and move. Eventually, that style doesn't always work in their favor. And there is one more person I'd like to add on this list, more as an honorable mention, but the only reason I didn't put him in this list among the 5 is that he falls in the same category as somebody like Conor McGregor or even Anderson Silva, in the sense that what he does special in the cage really suits him. And that person is Alex Pereira. Now, Alex, he's special in the sense that he has this one-punch knockout power. It's like he just touches you and he can knock you out. Similar to how Conor McGregor is, but Alex has a more traditional or conventional kickboxing style that more or less we can copy. So that's kind of why I didn't put him in the list initially. But there are habits that he does that we wouldn't or shouldn't really copy. He tends to have his hands lower, but that suits him because he's able to generate power from that stance. If you ever see his lead hook, his lead left hook, he just clips people, as it appears, and knocks them out. So he's not somebody we'd necessarily want to copy, but he has good fundamental kickboxing nonetheless. Although I would love to copy his entrance and how he comes into the cage. That's pretty badass. Chama. So overall, these are guys that we wouldn't want to really copy because their styles suit them. Or they've been able to develop that style over the years, which is hard to mimic now if you were trying to do this to make it your style. But there are takeaways. There are things we can borrow from them. Absolutely. Sean Strickland, he has a great use of his jab. He's great at reading his opponents. He has a nice lead push kick to keep it distance from his opponents. Those are fundamental movements that he uses well. Anderson Silva works really well at his takedown defense. That's something we can learn from if we're in MMA. Being able to read and how to transition between striking and grappling. That's something he does extremely well, and we can learn from that. And Tony Ferguson, although I did say it's not ideal to learn to fight in chaos, that mindset of striving within chaos is not just admirable, it is something that we can borrow from. It might be counterintuitive to what I said before, but that mindset of being able to keep your focus even when something is hard or something challenging comes upon you is something we could learn from. We can borrow at least a portion of that mindset that Tony Ferguson had in his career. From Conor McGregor, what we can learn is how to use that almost non-telegraphic movement when it comes to the strikes. He just throws his strikes from where he is. He doesn't do unnecessary movements. That's a fundamental aspect of striking that we should all use. Now, when it comes to MVP, it's a little more challenging to find something that works for everybody, but there is one thing. His footwork can be borrowed. Now, not his stance necessarily, but the way he moves in and out is something that we can use. There's a way you can bounce in and out to be in the pocket with your opponent and get right back out. That is something that we can borrow. Now, if you'd like me to do a tutorial on how to use that type of footwork that could be beneficial to your training, please, in the comments, write the word footwork and I'll work on that video for you guys. So that concludes my top 5 list of MMA fighters who I don't think you should be mimicking. But we can also borrow some concepts from them that would work. If you like this video, please don't forget to hit subscribe, hit that notification bell, and follow along in my Copycat series. And stay tuned for my next video, and I will cover the top 5 boxers who I feel you should mimic. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.